Yeah, I mean, for me, the problem is it nearly always comes back to the thing of normal distribution, and that is that we cannot. Well, we have market forces and normal distributions. These two things mean that you have a premium on the things that doesn't everybody doesn't have. If something is scarce, skills are scarce, knowledge is scarce, whatever it is that's scarce, commands a premium. And we might be in a situation where the old way of doing things is that the skills command a premium, but you also have everybody else somehow does find gainful employment, even if they're not in uh, the top 16% or 20% that get the work. But we're moving towards a state where actually the difference would be that if you're not in that top tier, you're not actually required in employment because all of those things can be done by machines to some degree. And we have other aspects of scarcity, like do we have enough raw materials to make billions of robots? Who knows? Maybe not. Metals and precious metals and all of these things are mined in different parts of the world. So, China does have a monopoly on certain things because you only find them in the mines in China. So they therefore have a competitive advantage compared to the countries that don't have those particular precious metals. So you have these different things in the mix that will change what's being done and where it's being done and where the impacts are. But yeah, it's these kinds of things we're not prepared, I find, we're not prepared even to admit in companies. If we bring this back to companies for a second.
Yes. We're not even having a proper discussion about this.
Well, if we take the L&D space, which is probably most of the people watching this, one of the things that I've been grappling with for many years is that we always kind of say, well, if we have learning interventions, then what we will be able to do is we will move the entirety of a company's population into the skilled part of the normal distribution. And that seems to be a fallacy. That seems to be something that why would we even expect that that's a possibility? We can expect that the curve and the mean would move, but you will still get outliers on either side. You will still get standard deviation from the mean in terms of the population of capability. So the thing that we target in the learning space should be to move the mean rather than to try and make everybody an outlier, because if everybody's an outlier, nobody's an outlier, right? So there's this concept of saying, well, we'll make everybody amazing by just putting them in a classroom or giving them a kind of digital intervention or something like that. We can help shift the needle, but we kind of need to be realistic about our expectations because people are variable. And because people are variable, it means you will get variation in the things that you do and the outcomes that you expect. And I don't think even that conversation is something that we are real about in our industries. If we apply AI to a lot of this stuff and we start to automate and we start to change what that looks like, then yes, we do move the needle in both ways. We improve performance of who's left and we potentially exit the ones that aren't performing to that level. So on the point of automation, we have a number of potential outcomes. So let's say we have agentic workflows, AI, we have automation, we have all of these things that a company can implement. And those things will have impacts on performance. Those things will have impacts on satisfaction, on motivation, on how people work, how people perform. How do we balance these things, the implementation of AI with the human factors of satisfaction, dissatisfaction, motivation, all of these things?
That's a really tough question, Ash. I'm sure you've heard the story, and there's a lot of people preaching it, myself included, that it's all going to be about looking at the growth of soft skills, the ability for us to develop critical thinking, further develop our critical thinking, teamwork within hybrid teams of humans and AI. Yes, that's all true. However, it's just a matter of time for many cases where we are not going to need the humans anymore. So let's take a look at computer developers. There is already this crisis of junior developers. It's well known. There's a lot of studies within, let's say, in the US, the crisis at the bottom. We don't need, as companies, junior developers now, because our mid-level developers, using AI tools, we can move the median there for all of them. Just give a mid-skilled developer a tool like Cursor or Windsurf and let them go with their vibe coding or whatever is going to be modern next week by the time we publish this, because it changes quite rapidly. And there they become suddenly very good. It happened within our company. We actually removed some junior contractor roles. We don't need those anymore, and they became a software subscription. So this is real, and this is already happening within many organizations, especially in the BPO sector. My honest thought: we really have to look at what makes us human and what drives us. I'm not sure whether it's Maslow's pyramid. I'm not sure whether it's a pyramid even, because you may argue it's flat. And then take a look at our building structures of society, of what is a human society, what is important for humans, what's important for us. What is our box? When we say think outside the box, well, the box is our societal norms, the box is our culture, our family. So what's within the box which defines you, me, everyone else? And really try to provide help. I was a part of a discussion yesterday with some really interesting entrepreneurs. A couple of them run like what you'd call a unicorn, even though that term doesn't seem to be popular in some areas anymore. And the major topic really was mindfulness, psychological well-being. And you wouldn't believe the things we were discussing. It was ranging from all kinds of religion, so no discrimination there, everybody's welcome, to shamanistic ceremonies, to rituals, ayahuasca rituals and whatnot, just in order to find meaning. Because that's all a bunch of people who see this and maybe see a bit further than most of humanity, but we are going to have to reevaluate what makes us human. And I'm fairly sure that for some part of humanity, of our Western capitalistic society, if I may, it might be that the definition of our ego, when we meet each other, I'd say, hey, I'm an entrepreneur. You'd say, hey, I'm an advisor, investor. Someone else is an architect and someone else is a computer developer. Right. What happens once those are subscriptions or free tier OpenAI or Anthropic subscriptions? Well, what's left? What does define a human? That's a conversation we're not having. That's a very deep conversation, existential level conversation, which is it's above and beyond what L&D is. But L&D can play a critical role here because it touches everyone within the current structures of their functions.
So I think there are two separate takes on that, right? So one is learning itself as an innate human condition, a thing that we all do from the first moment as a child. You go and touch the hot thing and you learn that it's hot and that it hurts, all the way through to the end of your life, where you keep having to adapt to the circumstances that you have. Learning, we all learn. Is there a department in a company that should own the processes around cognitive development? That's a very different question, because that's a corporate function. That's an enterprise risk management function. That's something that you do for competitive advantage or whatever it is. There are reasons to go and do that. Mm-hmm. And I think that is a very different question. But the question of what are we going to do? I wonder if we're having, as a society, as a species, we're kind of having a lot of existential crises at the moment.
Yes,
and I first noticed this when was it? It was maybe 10 years ago, maybe a little longer than that. I was doing boot camps. So, you go and instead of going to the gym, or maybe as well as going to the gym, for me, I like to go and lift weights, and, that's a thing that I like. And I went through a phase where I was doing these boot camps where you run around, you flip tires,
wow. Okay.
Go under the little cones, and, you do some kind of wriggling on your arms, military style, to try and get from here to there. And it was quite a lot of people were doing this at the time. And they used to have this thing, I don't know if they still have it, Tough Mudder, where you go and you wriggle around in the mud like a military obstacle course. And at the time I was reflecting and I was thinking, as knowledge workers, we're having this kind of crisis where, we don't use our bodies. We don't feel like we use our bodies. We sit at a desk and we type. And that means that we therefore have to think of more extreme ways to try and use our bodies, because you don't use it, you lose it, you atrophy. And so people are trying to think of, how do I recover this? And then you have things like the caveman diet, where, People are trying to get back to some kind of roots, ancestral roots. So you have crisis after crisis after crisis, and people are doing more and more extreme things. And it occurred to me when you were talking about the kind of shamanistic rituals that people might go through for well-being and things like that. Is that also an indicator of a crisis that we're having? So somehow we're not focusing on our well-being, so we need to take some kind of more extreme way of doing that. What do you think?
100%. I think it's everything is a compensatory mechanism, and I can only relate to that. I personally train Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu every day, no days off, including weekends, for the past 7 years. I've been doing that. Before it was other martial arts. I got older and I decided I don't want to be punched in the head. But I can only relate to that, and it's been like this for 20 plus years. So, and yes, look, what I'm saying is there is a bunch of ways you can try to fix your brain, fix your hormones, fix whatever situation you think might be your normal, baseline. It goes off. We're all stressed, we're all underslept, we're all drinking too much coffee, we're all being disrupted, and there's a bunch of ways to do that. Spirituality might be one. Somebody might find a meaning in religion, having some kind of a discovery there. Somebody might find it in shamanistic ceremonies. What I'm saying is I think all those compensate for us not being what we're designed to be. Because think of it this way: what's the hardware difference between you, me, and someone who lived 10,000 years ago? There is none. I mean, I guess we're weaker as bodies because we're just not out. But in terms of hardware, it's the same. It's the same lung volume, brain volume, heart, everything is the same. However, we've changed our lives over the past, since 200 years, plus minus, since the Industrial Revolution. We're sitting more and more, and our work is becoming more and more cognitively heavy. So the end result is I'm sure most of us, not all, but most of us will get disrupted. And it's just a question of time. If you look at even IQ tests, O1 Pro, which was released by OpenAI, December? Now it's available in the API for some kind of extortion amount of money. But I'm sure they're preparing us for something even more expensive. I mean, it's available since last night or 2 days ago, whatever. It has an IQ of 120 if you give it an IQ test, which puts it's already smarter than most people. So if we take a look at Moore's law, and the saying is that we now have AI models doubling at 3 times Moore's law, basically saying we have a doubling of price performance every 6 months or so. It doesn't matter if it's 6 months or 8 months or a year. Longer term, it's the same. So we'll have to adapt. We'll have to find our compensatory mechanisms. I'm fairly sure it will have to do in some way, shape, or form with physical movement. It's something which is natural. We're not a brain which is disconnected from the body. It's an integrated system. It's not like it's 2 separate things, even though we like to think about it. So we got to think about things more holistically and implement whatever mindfulness techniques work for us or work for our company or culture or are acceptable, because some of them are not acceptable in Western society, but completely okay in other societies.